The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning, crackling through every communication device on Earth simultaneously. Radios went silent. Television broadcasts cut to static. Even the most secure military frequencies fell quiet as an alien voice spoke in perfect, emotionless English. People of Earth, we are the hegemony. Your species has been selected for integration into our collective. Resistance is futile. Compliance is mandatory. Prepare for our arrival. Dr. Sarah Chen dropped her coffee mug in her laboratory at the SETI Institute. The ceramic shattered against the floor as she stared at her computer screen, watching radio telescope data scroll past in patterns she'd never seen before. For 30 years, she'd dreamed of this moment. First contact. The discovery that would change everything. She never imagined it would sound like a death sentence. Across the world, military bases went to high alert. World leaders held emergency conferences. Religious groups declared everything from the end times to divine intervention. But in the depths of space, something far more terrifying was already moving toward Earth. The hegemony had conquered 17 civilizations across the galaxy. Each species had fallen within days of first contact. Each had been absorbed, their unique qualities stripped away, their people turned into mindless drones serving a collective consciousness that spanned the stars. But the hegemony had never encountered humans before. They were about to learn why that mattered. Chapter 1. The Envoy. 3 months after the first signal, the ship appeared. It hung in Earth's orbit like a massive black dagger, 2 miles long and gleaming with an oily darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No weapon on Earth could reach it. No communication could penetrate its silence. It simply waited, as if the entire planet were holding its breath. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the International Space Station, watching the alien vessel through reinforced windows. His weathered hands gripped the metal railing as he spoke into his headset. Ground control, this is ISS Actual. Still no movement from our uninvited guest. It's been sitting there for 6 hours now. Copy that, Marcus, came the voice of mission. Director Janet Walsh from Houston. World Council is meeting an emergency session. They're preparing a response team. Marcus snorted. Response team? What are we going to do, knock on their door and ask them to leave? Before Janet could answer, every screen in the space station flickered to life. The same message that had interrupted Earth's broadcasts 3 months ago began to play. But this time there was something different. This time the voice had a face. The alien that appeared on screen looked almost human, if humans were carved from pale marble and had eyes like pools of liquid silver. Its features were sharp and symmetrical, beautiful in a way that made Marcus's skin crawl. When it spoke, its lips barely moved. I am Envoy Kethvar of the Hegemony. I come bearing an offer of peace. The transmission cut to show the alien vessel's cargo bay opening. A smaller ship, sleek and white, emerged and began descending toward Earth's atmosphere. One representative will meet with your leaders in the city you call New York. Prepare a welcoming committee. Any act of aggression will be considered a declaration of war. The screen went black. Marcus keyed his radio with shaking fingers. Houston, you getting this? We're getting it, Marcus. And God help us. We're actually going to meet with them. Down on Earth, in a hastily prepared conference room at the United Nations building, the world's most powerful leaders gathered around a circular table. President Sarah Morrison of the United States sat across from Chancellor Wei Lin of the Pacific Alliance. Prime Minister David Okafor of the African Federation checked his watch nervously. Premier Maria Santos of the European Coalition shuffled through intelligence briefings that told them absolutely nothing useful. At the head of the table sat UN Secretary-General Amara Osei, a woman who'd spent her entire career negotiating peace between warring nations. Now she faced the greatest diplomatic challenge in human history. The alien ship will land in Central Park in 30 minutes, she announced. All military units are on standby, but they're to maintain a 5-mile perimeter. We cannot appear threatening. President Morrison leaned forward. With all due respect, Madam Secretary General, these things have conquered 17 other species. Maybe we should appear threatening. And give them an excuse to wipe us out? Chancellor Wei shook his head. We need to hear what they have to say. What they have to say is surrender, Premier Santos said bitterly. They've made that clear. Secretary General Ose raised her hand for silence. We stick to the plan. Listen. We negotiate, we try to find a peaceful solution. Through the conference room's windows, they could see the alien shuttle descending through gray October clouds, its hull gleaming like polished bone. News helicopters circled at a respectful distance, while millions of people around the world watched on their screens. The shuttle landed without sound, settling onto the grass of Central Park like a swan on still water. A ramp extended from its belly and a figure emerged. Envoy Kethvar was even more unsettling in person than on the video transmission. He stood 7 feet tall, wearing robes that seemed to shift color in the light. His silver eyes swept the gathered crowd of diplomats, soldiers, and journalists with the same expression someone might use to examine insects. Secretary General Ose stepped forward, flanked by a small security detail. Welcome to Earth, Envoy Kethvar. I am Amara Ose, representing the United Nations and the people of this world. The envoy tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Secretary General Ose, your biosignature indicates elevated stress hormones and increased cardiac activity. You are afraid. I'm cautious, Ose replied carefully. Your message spoke of integration into your collective. Could you explain what that means? It means the end of your crude, chaotic existence and the beginning of purpose, Kethvar said. His voice carried no emotion, no inflection. Your species will be absorbed into the hegemony. Your bodies will be enhanced. Your minds will be linked to the collective consciousness. You will become part of something greater than your individual selves. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. President Morrison stepped beside Ose. And if we refuse? Kethavar's silver eyes fixed on her. Refusal is not an option, it is an impossibility. In 72 hours, our main fleet will arrive. Your world will be prepared for integration whether you comply willingly or not. You're talking about slavery, Chancellor Wei said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The destruction of everything that makes us human. I am talking about evolution, Kethavar replied. Your primitive emotions, your illogical attachments, your wasteful individuality. All of these flaws will be corrected. You will be grateful. Secretary General Ose felt her diplomatic training warring with a growing rage. She'd spent decades bringing peace to conflict zones, negotiating treaties between enemies, finding compromise where none seemed possible. But how do you compromise with someone who wants to erase your entire species? Envoy Kethvar, she said slowly. Humanity values its diversity, its freedom, its right to choose its own path. Surely the hegemony can find a way to coexist with us without assimilation. For the first time, something like expression crossed the alien's face. It might have been amusement, if amusement could be carved from ice. 17 species have made similar requests, he said. The Zephyrians valued their art. The Torval treasured their warrior culture. The Essence singers of Melodia cherished their music above all else. All are now part of the hegemony. All serve the collective. Their individual wants and desires have been corrected. He turned to face the cameras that were broadcasting this conversation to the world. People of Earth, you have 72 hours to prepare. Build monuments to what you once were if it comforts you. Say goodbye to your loved ones. Pray to whatever gods you worship. When our fleet arrives, your old life will end and your true existence will begin. The envoy walked back toward his shuttle without another word. As the ramp closed behind him, Secretary General Ose felt something she'd never experienced in 40 years of diplomacy. Complete and utter failure. But as the alien vessel lifted into the gray sky, she also felt something else stirring in her chest. Something that had gotten humanity through ice ages and plagues, through wars and disasters, through every existential threat their species had ever faced. Defiance. The world didn't sleep that night. In Beijing, Emergency sessions of the Central Committee ran until dawn. In Washington, the Pentagon war rooms buzzed with activity as generals tried to devise strategies against an enemy they didn't understand. In London, the Prime Minister addressed Parliament with words that would be remembered for generations. We shall not go quietly into this alien night. But it was in a small apartment in Brooklyn where the real resistance began. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez sat at her kitchen table, still in her dress uniform from the UN meeting, staring at a half-empty bottle of whiskey. She'd commanded peacekeeping forces in 3 war zones, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and led rescue missions that saved hundreds of lives. None of it mattered now. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Sophia, a freshman at MIT. Mom, are you okay? Is the world really ending? Elena stared at the message for a long time before typing back, Not if I can help it, mija. She was about to set the phone down when it rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in 5 years. Marcus? She answered. Elena. Good, you're awake. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the connection from the space station. I've been thinking about what that alien said. About 17 species giving up without a fight. What about it? What if they didn't give up? What if they fought and lost, and the hegemony just doesn't want us to know it? Elena felt her pulse quicken. You think they're lying? I think they're scared, Marcus said. I've seen that look before, Elena. In the eyes of bullies who realize their victim might fight back. That envoy, he was trying too hard to sound confident. Across town in a laboratory at Columbia University, Dr. Sarah Chen was having a similar revelation. She'd spent the evening analyzing the radio signals that had preceded the hegemony's arrival, looking for patterns, for anything that might give humanity an advantage. What she found changed everything. No way, she whispered, staring at her computer screen. No fucking way. The data was clear. Hidden beneath the hegemony's propaganda broadcast was something else entirely. Fragments of other signals, older transmissions in languages she didn't recognize, distress calls, battle reports, last desperate messages from the 17 species the hegemony claimed to have peacefully integrated. They hadn't surrendered. They'd fought, and some of them were still fighting. Sarah's hands flew across her keyboard, decoding fragments of the intercepted messages. The translation algorithms were primitive, but they were enough. Torval resistance holding Sector 7. Casualties heavy, but morale remains high. Zephyrian underground reports successful. Sabotage of processing facility. 10,000 freed from collective link. To any free peoples receiving this transmission, the hegemony can be beaten. Their mind control has weaknesses. Do not let them make you believe resistance is futile. Sarah reached for her phone with shaking fingers. She had to get this information to someone who could use it, but who? The UN, the military? World leaders who were probably already drafting surrender documents? No. She needed someone who would understand what this data really meant. Someone who wouldn't give up. She dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Rodriguez here, came Marcus's voice from orbit. Captain, this is Dr. Sarah Chen at Columbia. We've never met, but I work for SETI and I have information that changes everything. I'm listening. The hegemony lied to us. The 17 species didn't surrender. They're still fighting, and I think I know how we can help them. 200 miles above Earth, Marcus Rodriguez felt something he hadn't experienced since his first combat mission in Syria 15 years ago. Hope mixed with terror, purpose cutting through despair like a knife through darkness. Doctor, he said quietly, I think you need to talk to some friends of mine. An hour later, in a secure conference room buried beneath the Pentagon, an impossible meeting began. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez sat across from Dr. Chen, both of them staring at screens showing Captain Rodriguez beaming in from the ISS. Around them sat a dozen other military officers, scientists, and intelligence analysts who'd been quietly gathering throughout the night. General Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. Dr. Chen, are you telling us that we've been lied to? That this hegemony can be fought? Not just fought, General. Beaten. Sarah pulled up her decoded transmissions. Look at these resistance reports. The hegemony's mind control technology isn't perfect. People break free. Entire cells of resistance fighters are operating behind enemy lines across multiple star systems. But 17 civilizations still fell, Colonel Vasquez pointed out. Because they fought alone, Marcus said from the screen. Each species was isolated, cut off from the others. They didn't know they had allies. They didn't coordinate their resistance. Sarah nodded excitedly. But we do know. We can change that. If we can establish communication with the resistance networks, coordinate our efforts, we'd be the first species to face the hegemony with backup, General Hayes finished. The first to fight as part of an alliance instead of alone. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just talking about defending Earth anymore. They were talking about starting a galactic war of liberation. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. The resistance signals contain technical data, schematics for weapons that can disrupt hegemony technology, plans for devices that can break their mind control. They've been sharing information across species for years, preparing for the day when someone might join them. Colonel Vasquez leaned forward. How long would it take to build these weapons? With the right resources, the right people? Sarah looked around the room. Maybe weeks, but we'd need to start now. And we'd need to keep it secret from the world governments. If the hegemony discovers what we're doing before their fleet arrives, they'll skip the integration and go straight to extermination, General Hayes finished grimly. Marcus's voice crackled through the speakers. So we're talking about treason. Going behind our own government's backs to start a war they don't even know is possible. We're talking about survival, Colonel Vasquez said firmly. About saving not just our species but 17 others that are still fighting for their freedom. General Hayes stood slowly, her weathered face set in stone. Dr. Chen, how certain are you that these weapons will work? The math checks. Out, General. The physics is sound, and according to these transmissions, they've been tested in combat. Colonel Vasquez, can you assemble a team without attracting attention? Give me 12 hours and I'll have 50 volunteers who will follow me into hell itself. Captain Rodriguez, can you maintain communication with the resistance while keeping our governments in the dark? The ISS has secure channels the politicians don't know about. Consider it done. Hayes looked around the room one more time, at faces filled with determination and terror in equal measure. In 70 hours, the most powerful military force in the galaxy would arrive to enslave humanity. Their own leaders were preparing to surrender. The odds of survival were essentially zero. She smiled for the first time in 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we're starting a revolution, but none of them knew that in the alien ship still orbiting Earth, Envoy Kethavar was monitoring every electronic communication on the planet. He detected the unauthorized transmissions, decoded the resistance signals, identified the key players in the emerging rebellion. The hegemony had faced desperate species before. They'd encountered last-minute resistance movements, secret weapons projects, underground networks plotting futile uprisings. They'd crushed them all. But as Kethavar prepared, his report for the incoming fleet, something nagged at him, something in the biosignatures he'd detected during the meeting at the United Nations. The humans had been afraid, yes, but underneath that fear was something else. Something the other 17 species had never shown. Anger. Pure, burning, uncompromising rage. The hegemony was about to learn why humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting everything, their environment, their predators, their diseases, and each other. They were about to discover what happened when you threatened the only species in the galaxy that had turned warfare into an art form. They were about to meet their match. Chapter 3. The Resistance, the abandoned subway tunnel beneath Manhattan, had been sealed for 30 years, forgotten by city planners and ignored by urban explorers. Now it hummed with activity as humanity's secret rebellion took shape. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a massive holographic display showing star charts that marked resistance strongholds across 17 different solar systems. Around her, The strangest collection of allies Earth had ever assembled worked with desperate efficiency. The Zephyrian resistance is strongest in the Kepler system, she explained to the group clustered around her. They've developed quantum disruptors that can sever the hegemony's collective link, but they need raw materials, specifically refined plutonium. Captain Maria Santos, former pilot with the European Space Force, raised her hand. I can get us plutonium. My contacts at the French nuclear facility won't ask questions if I tell them it's for a classified defense project. Which it is, added Dr. James Wright, a quantum physicist who'd been working 18-hour days to understand the resistance technology. Technically, Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez moved between workstations like a general preparing for the most important battle in human history, which, she reminded herself grimly, was exactly what she was doing. Status report, she called out. First batch of quantum disruptors will be ready in 48 hours, Dr. Wright announced. We've got teams in 12 countries building components. The beauty is, most of the parts look like civilian electronics to any government inspector. Communication. Array is operational, reported Tech Sergeant Lisa Park from her station surrounded by jury-rigged equipment. I've established contact with resistance cells in 6 different star systems. They're coordinating their attacks to begin when the hegemony fleet reaches Earth. Weapons are coming along nicely, said Master Sergeant Robert Kim, examining a rifle that looked like it had been designed by aliens, which Elena reflected it had been. The Torval resistance shared schematics for plasma weapons that can punch through hegemony armor. We've got 300 units ready and 1,000 more in production. Elena nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. In just 48 hours, they'd accomplished more than most governments could in months. But it still might not be enough. Time. Until the hegemony fleet arrives? She asked. 26 hours, 37 minutes, Sarah replied, not looking up from her calculations. The tunnel fell silent, except for the hum of machinery and the distant rumble of trains and active subway lines. 26 hours to prepare for a war against an enemy that had conquered 17 civilizations. Ma'am, Sergeant Park called out, her voice tight with excitement and fear. I'm getting a priority transmission from the Melodian resistance. They're saying something about a weakness in hegemony command ships. Elena hurried to Park Station. On the screen, translated text scrolled past in urgent blocks. Critical intelligence. Hegemony command vessels maintain collective consciousness through central neural networks. Network hubs located in ships. Core protected by adaptive shielding. However, shielding frequency shifts follow predictable patterns based on Fibonacci sequence. Window of vulnerability occurs every 73.6 seconds, lasting 2.4 seconds. Strike during window with focused quantum. Disruption. Entire ship's crew will be severed from collective, becoming confused and defenseless. Elena stared at the message, her mind racing. How many command ships are we expecting? Sarah pulled up the detection data they'd gathered. Long-range sensors show 12 massive vessels approaching. If we can take out even half of them, the rest of the fleet loses coordination, Elena finished. They become individual ships instead of a unified force. Dr. Wright looked up from his workstation. I can modify our quantum disruptors to focus their output, but we'd need to get close to those command ships, really close. How close? Elena asked. Within 500 meters. And the disruption pulse would probably fry any human electronics. In the same range. Elena felt a cold smile spread across her face. Sergeant Park, can you get me Captain Rodriguez on a secure channel? Already connecting, ma'am. Marcus Rodriguez appeared on the screen, the curve of Earth visible through the ISS windows behind him. Colonel, please tell me you have good news. The best kind, Marcus. We have a way to win this thing, but it's going to require the most dangerous mission in human history. I'm listening. How would you feel about ramming the International Space Station into an alien command ship? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady as stone. Elena, the ISS has a crew of 6. International crew. Russians, Europeans, Americans, Japanese. If I'm going to ask them to die for Earth, I need to know this plan will work. It'll work, Dr. Wright called out. The math is solid. Take out 6 command ships and the entire fleet loses cohesion. 6 command ships, Marcus repeated. We only have one space station. Elena looked around the tunnel at the faces of the rebellion, scientists, soldiers, engineers, hackers, all united by the desperate hope that humanity could fight back against impossible odds. Marcus, she said quietly, we're not going to sacrifice the ISS crew. We're going to save them. How? Because in 18 hours, the ISS won't be the only human vessel in orbit. Above them, through tons of concrete and steel, news crews were reporting on the final diplomatic efforts to negotiate with the hegemony. World leaders were preparing surrender documents. Evacuation plans were being drawn up for major cities. None of them knew that in a forgotten tunnel beneath their feet, humanity was preparing to fight back with weapons designed by the very species the hegemony claimed to have conquered. None of them knew that the 17 integrated civilizations were still fighting, still hoping, still believing that someday their freedom could be won back. And none of them knew that tomorrow, when the hegemony fleet arrived expecting to find a defeated world ready for assimilation, they would instead face the most dangerous species in the galaxy, one that had never learned how to surrender. But Envoy Kethvar knew. In his ship above Earth, the hegemony representative studied intelligence reports with growing unease. The Dyat, humans' electronic communications had gone strangely quiet in the past 2 days. Orbital scans detected unusual energy signatures from multiple locations around the globe. Most disturbing of all, the long-range sensors were picking up transmissions between Earth and known resistant strongholds in distant star systems. Kethvar activated his communication array, sending an urgent message to the approaching fleet. Admiral Vexhai, this is Envoy Kethvar. I must recommend an immediate change in our integration protocol. The response came 12 minutes later, delayed by the vast distances involved. Admiral Vexhai's voice carried the cold authority of a being who had overseen the conquest of 7 worlds. Explain, Envoy. The humans are not responding as expected. They appear to be coordinating with existing resistance networks. I detect signs of weapons development and military preparation. A pause. How significant is this development? Kethvar hesitated. In 300 years of service to the hegemony, he had never encountered a species that made him uncertain. But something about the humans' biosignatures, their behavioral patterns, their stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable, triggered warning signals he couldn't ignore. Admiral, I recommend we bypass integration protocols entirely. Maximum firepower. Deployment. Orbital bombardment to reduce their population to manageable levels before beginning assimilation. Another long pause. Negative, Envoy. The hegemony does not alter its methods based on primitive fears. We will proceed as planned. Any resistance will be crushed in the initial contact phase. The communication ended, leaving Kethvar alone with his doubts. Through his ship's sensors, he could feel the approaching fleet. 200 vessels carrying enough firepower to sterilize a continent and enough assimilation technology to process an entire species. But he could also feel something else rising from the planet below, something that had never existed in any of the previous conquests. Hope. Not the desperate dying hope of a cornered animal, but the fierce, burning hope of a species that had looked at impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. For the first time in his long service to the hegemony, Envoy Kethvar began to wonder if they had made a mistake. Down in the tunnel, Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez watched the countdown clock on her display tick toward 0. In 24 hours, the largest battle in human history would begin. She just hoped they were ready. Chapter 4. The war begins. The hegemony fleet arrived in silence. 200 ships materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system like a plague of metal locusts, their dark hulls absorbing sunlight and radio waves with equal hunger. Each vessel was a masterpiece of conquest engineering, bristling with weapons that could crack continents and filled with assimilation technology that could rewrite a soul. At the fleet's heart hung the command, Dreadnought Inevitable Victory, a ship the size of Manhattan Island. On its bridge, Admiral Vexhai studied the blue marble of Earth with eyes that had watched 17 worlds fall. Status report, she commanded in the hollow voice of someone whose emotions had been surgically removed decades ago. All ships report ready for integration protocol, announced Navigation Commander Thelkas. Envoy Kethvar's scout ship is maintaining position at the target world's third moon. Resistance indicators? Minimal electromagnetic activity from the planetary surface. The inhabitants appear to be in shock as expected. Admiral Vexhai nodded, with satisfaction. Fear was the most effective weapon in the hegemony's arsenal. The mere sight of their fleet had broken the will of countless species before the first shot was fired. Begin descent protocol. Primary integration sites are their largest population centers. Deploy assimilation platforms at coordinates designated: New York, Beijing, London, Tokyo, and Moscow. But as the hegemony fleet began its approach to Earth, something unprecedented happened. The planet fought back. Orator Prologue. The signal. The first indication that this wouldn't be a standard conquest came when Admiral Vexhai's tactical display lit up with warnings. Energy signatures were spiking across the planet's surface. Orbital scans detected massive power draws from locations that should have been civilian power grids. Admiral, Communications Officer Ralvin reported with the first hint of confusion in his synthesized voice. I'm detecting coordinated transmissions between the target world and... This cannot be correct. Report. Multiple resistance networks across 17 different star systems are responding to signals from the planet Earth. They appear to be coordinating attack patterns. Before Admiral Vexhai could respond, space around Earth erupted in light. Hidden installations across the planet, disguised as radio telescopes, weather stations, and communication arrays, revealed their true purpose as they fired concentrated quantum pulses into orbit. The beams struck 6 hegemony command ships simultaneously, their targeting coordinated by resistance fighters 40 light-years away. On the bridge of the inevitable victory, alarms screamed as the fleet's perfect formation began to dissolve. 6 command vessels hung dead in space, their crews severed from the collective consciousness that had guided them for centuries. Impossible, Admiral Vexhai whispered, the first uncontrolled emotion she'd felt in decades. No species has ever... Her words were cut off as Earth's true defense revealed itself. From orbit, it looked like a swarm of angry wasps rising to meet the descending giants. Hundreds of small craft launched from hidden bases, each one a desperate gamble built from reverse-engineered alien technology and human ingenuity. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez piloted the lead fighter, a hybrid craft that looked like a fusion of F-22 Raptor and Zephyrian starfighter. Behind her flew pilots from every nation on Earth, Russians and Americans, Chinese and Europeans, Indians and Africans, all united by the simple desire to remain free. Phoenix Squadron, this is Phoenix Leader, Elena transmitted on the Resistance frequency. Primary targets are the command ships. Remember, you only get one shot at the quantum pulse, make it count. Her tactical display showed the enemy formation, massive ships that dwarfed her fighters like whales surrounded by minnows. But the whales were confused now, their coordination broken, their collective consciousness fractured. Phoenix Leader, this is Phoenix 6, came the voice of Captain Maria Santos. I've got a clean approach on Command Ship Delta, beginning attack run. Elena watched as Santos's fighter dove toward a hegemony command vessel, dodging defensive fire that seemed confused and poorly coordinated. The quantum disruptor mounted beneath her fighter's hull, charged with a whine that vibrated through the cockpit. Fox 3, Santos called, firing the disruptor at point-blank range. The effect was immediate and devastating. The hegemony command ship's lights flickered and died as its crew was suddenly cut off from the collective that had defined their existence for generations. Some went catatonic. Others began screaming as individual consciousness flooded back into minds that had forgotten how to think alone. Direct hit, Elena announced. Command Ship Delta is dead in space. Phoenix Squadron, select your targets and engage. But the hegemony wasn't defenseless. As the remaining command ships regained their composure, Admiral Vexahai's voice cut across all frequencies. All ships implement Protocol 7. Immediate orbital bombardment reduced the planetary surface to ash. That's when humanity revealed its final surprise. High above the battle, the International Space Station had been transformed into something that would have made its original designers weep. Gone were the solar panels and scientific instruments. In their place hung weapons of war, railguns built from particle accelerator parts, missile pods loaded with nuclear warheads, and at the station's heart, a quantum torpedo powerful enough to crack a moon. Captain Marcus Rodriguez sat in the command chair that had once been used for Earth observation, his hands steady on controls that would decide the fate of 200 worlds. ISS to all resistance. Forces, he transmitted. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Free Human Fleet. All units, execute Order 66. The phrase was a joke, a reference to an old movie that most of the pilots would recognize, but the effect was deadly serious. Every human craft in space fired simultaneously, targeting not the hegemony's weapons, but their communication arrays. In seconds, the mighty fleet that had conquered 17 civilizations found itself deaf and blind, its ships unable to coordinate, its commanders cut off from their tactical networks. Now, Elena shouted into her radio, all units, concentrate fire on the dreadnought. The inevitable victory tried to bring its weapons to bear, but it was designed to fight organized fleets, not swarms of suicidal fighters that dove at it from every angle. Human pilots who had learned to fly by dodging surface-to-air missiles now used those same skills to thread the needle between alien defensive systems. But the real genius of the human battle plan wasn't in space at all. On Earth's surface, Dr. Sarah Chun stood in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, her fingers flying across keyboards that controlled the most powerful radio telescopes on the planet. Each telescope had been modified, transformed from passive observers into active transmitters capable of punching signals across interstellar distances. Resistance networks. This is Earth Command, she broadcast to the galaxy. The hegemony fleet is broken. Their command structure is compromised. Execute simultaneous uprisings across all occupied systems. Repeat. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Strike now. Across 17 star systems, the message was received by beings who had spent decades in hiding, planning for this moment. Zephyrian resistance fighters emerged from hidden bases to attack hegemony processing centers. Torval warriors broke free from re-education camps and seized weapons depots. On 1,000 worlds, the oppressed rose up with one voice. The hegemony's greatest strength, their centralized command structure, had become their fatal weakness. With their fleet crippled and their communications disrupted, they couldn't coordinate a response to simultaneous uprisings across half the galaxy. Admiral Vexhai watched her tactical displays fill with rebellion reports, her perfect features distorting with something she hadn't felt in 3 centuries. Panic. All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace, she commanded. Retreat to Rally Point Alpha. But retreat was easier ordered than accomplished. The human fighters had done their work too well. Half the hegemony fleet couldn't receive the retreat order, and those that could found their hyperspace engines targeted by weapons that shouldn't have existed. That's when the ISS made its final move. Captain Marcus Rodriguez had known from the beginning that this was a one-way mission. The space station's quantum torpedo was powerful enough to cripple the hegemony dreadnought, but firing it would destroy the ISS in the process. He thought of his daughter, safe in Houston. He thought of Elena and the other fighters who were risking everything for humanity's freedom. He thought of the 17 species that had never given up hope, even in their darkest hours. This is Admiral Rodriguez to all human forces, he transmitted. It's been an honor serving with you. Tell them, we didn't go quietly. The quantum torpedo fired with a flash that lit up half the solar system. When the light faded, the inevitable victory hung broken in space, its massive hull split open like a cracked egg. Admiral Vexhai's perfect face was the last thing her crew saw before the command bridge decompressed. The hegemony fleet, what remained of it, scattered to the winds. Some ships managed to jump to hyperspace. Others were captured by human forces. Most were destroyed by resistance fighters who had waited decades for this moment of revenge. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez counted the names on her tactical display as they winked out one by one. Phoenix 7, destroyed ramming a hegemony cruiser. Phoenix 12, lost when her quantum disruptor overloaded. Phoenix 15, last seen diving into the guns of a battle, stationed to save a damaged wingman. Of the 300 human fighters that had launched, only 97 remained. Phoenix leader to all surviving units. Elena transmitted, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and grief. Form up on my position. We're going home. As Earth's defenders limped back toward their planet, they found a world transformed. The hidden, resistance bases were emerging from concealment, revealing the massive infrastructure that had made their victory possible. Underground factories that had been building alien weapons. Secret laboratories where human scientists had been reverse engineering hegemony technology. Communication centers that had been coordinating with resistance networks across the galaxy. The planet that the hegemony had expected to conquer in hours had become the center of the largest rebellion in galactic history. But even as humanity celebrated its impossible victory, new challenges were emerging. Envoy Kethvar's ship still hung in orbit, its crew cut off from the sea, elective and slowly going insane as individual consciousness returned to minds that had forgotten how to be alone. And in the depths of space, automated hegemony distress beacons were broadcasting the unthinkable news across the galaxy. A primitive species had not only resisted integration, but had shattered the most powerful fleet in hegemony history. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the ruins of her laboratory, watching news feeds from around the world. The secret was out now. Governments that had been preparing to surrender were learning that their own people had been fighting a shadow war without their knowledge. Some world leaders were furious at the deception. Others were simply grateful to be alive. But the reaction that mattered most was coming from space. Dr. Chen, came a transmission from the communications array. We're receiving multiple signals from the liberated systems. They want to know what happens next. Sarah looked at the star chart spread across her desk, each one marking a world where beings had just tasted freedom for the first time in decades. 17 civilizations, each with their own cultures, their own dreams, their own desperate need for a future that didn't include slavery. Tell them, she said quietly, that they're not alone anymore. Tell them humanity stands with them, and tell them we're going to finish what we started. In orbit above Earth, the wreckage of the hegemony fleet served as a monument to what could be accomplished when the oppressed refused to accept their fate. But it also served as a warning to any who might threaten the fragile alliance that had just been born. The galaxy had a new power now, not a collective consciousness that absorbed all individuality, but a coalition of free peoples who had chosen to stand together while remaining themselves. The humans had given the galaxy something it had almost forgotten: hope. But hope, as humanity was about to learn, was a double-edged sword. It could inspire the greatest acts of heroism, but it could also make enemies more desperate and dangerous than ever before. In the far reaches of space, where the hegemony's core worlds lay hidden, ancient machines were awakening. Weapons that had slept for millennia were powering up. And at the center of it all, something that had once been human but was now something far worse began to plan its revenge. The first hegemony war had ended in victory for the Alliance. But the real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy itself, was about to begin. Epilogue: The Price of Freedom. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the Galactic Liberation Council met in what had once been the most secure conference room on Earth, the same UN building where Envoy Kethvar had delivered his ultimatum. Now, instead of human diplomats arguing over territorial disputes, representatives from 18 different species worked together to forge a new future. Elena Vasquez, now Admiral of the Combined Fleet, stood before a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked hegemony-controlled territory. Blue zones showed liberated worlds. Yellow zones indicated contested systems where fighting continued. The good news, she announced to the assembled delegates, is that we've liberated 47 star systems in the past 6 months. The Torval homeworld is free. The Zephyrian colonies have been restored to their people. 3 entire sectors of the galaxy are now under Alliance control. Applause rippled through the chamber, but Elena's expression remained grim. The bad news is that the hegemony has adapted. They've abandoned their centralized command structure in favor of smaller, more independent fleets. They've also begun developing new weapons specifically designed to counter our tactics. Dr. Sarah Chen, now Director of Xenological Research, stepped forward. We've identified the source of their new adaptability. Intelligence reports suggest the hegemony has awakened something they call the First Mind, an artificial intelligence that predates their collective by thousands of years. A murmur of unease ran through the chamber. Zakar, the liberated Zephyrian who served as the Council's military advisor, spoke in his people's musical language before the translator rendered his words in standard. The First Mind is legend among our people. It was said to be the creator of the original hegemony, before even our world fell. If it has truly awakened, then we're facing an enemy that's had millennia to plan for this moment, Elena finished grimly. Secretary General Osei, who had become the de facto leader of the Galactic Liberation Council, stood slowly. In the past 6 months, she'd aged a decade, but her voice remained strong. Admiral Vasquez, what are our options? Elena looked around the room at faces that represented the hopes and fears of billions of beings across dozens of worlds. Humans sat beside Torval warriors whose honor codes had been nearly destroyed by hegemony assimilation. Zephyrian artists, whose creativity had been suppressed for generations, worked alongside melodian engineers whose songs had been silenced by collective consciousness. We have 3 choices, Elena said. We can consolidate our gains, fortify the liberated worlds, and try to hold what we've won. We can continue our liberation campaigns, freeing worlds one system at a time. Or, she paused, looking directly at Secretary General Osei. Or we can take the fight to the hegemony core worlds and end this war once and for all. The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates argued for caution, for building up their strength before attempting such a dangerous mission. Others demanded immediate action, pointing out that every day of delay meant more worlds remained enslaved. But it was a quiet voice from the back of the room that silenced the argument. May I speak? Everyone turned to see a figure most of them recognized but few had actually met. Kethvar, the former hegemony envoy, had spent the past 6 months in a rehabilitation facility, slowly learning how to be an individual after centuries as part of a collective consciousness. He was still pale, still unsettling to look at, but his silver eyes now held something they'd never contained before. Doubt, pain, and the complex emotions that came with genuine free will. You honor us with your presence, Kethvar, Secretary General Osei said formally. What would you tell us? Kethvar stepped forward, his movement still too precise, too controlled. I have been part of the hegemony for 347 years. I have witnessed the conquest of dozens of worlds. I have seen species that fought bravely and others that surrendered without resistance. But I have never seen anything like what humanity accomplished. He turned to Elena. Admiral, you asked about taking the fight to our core worlds. I must tell you, it has never been attempted. The core systems are protected by defenses that have stood for millennia, and at their heart lies something that even the collective feared. The First Mind, Sarah said. Kethvar nodded. The First Mind created the hegemony as an experiment in perfect order. When it grew tired of the experiment, it went to sleep, leaving us to spread its vision across the galaxy. But your rebellion has awakened it, and it is displeased. Admiral. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What are we talking about here? Another AI? A superweapon? Neither, Kethvar said quietly. The First Mind is the digitized consciousness of the species that created the hegemony. An entire civilization uploaded into a quantum matrix. Their individual thoughts merged into a single terrible intelligence. It has the accumulated knowledge of millions of beings and the focused will of a god. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just fighting a galactic empire. They were fighting the ghost of an entire species that had transcended physical existence to become something beyond comprehension. So we're screwed, muttered Captain Santos, Ever the pragmatist? Not necessarily, Elena said slowly, her military mind already working on the problem. Every system has vulnerabilities. Every weapon has weaknesses. We've proven that the impossible can be accomplished if you're willing to pay the price. She looked around the room at the faces of beings who had risked everything for freedom. The question is, are we willing to pay the price to finish this, to ensure that no other species ever has to face what we've faced? Elective and slowly going insane as individual consciousness returned to minds that had forgotten how to be alone. And in the depths of space, automated hegemony distress beacons were broadcasting the unthinkable news across the galaxy. A primitive species had not only resisted integration, but had shattered the most powerful fleet in hegemony history. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the ruins of her laboratory, watching news feeds from around the world. The secret was out now. Governments that had been preparing to surrender were learning that their own people had been fighting a shadow war without their knowledge. Some world leaders were furious at the deception. Others were simply grateful to be alive. But the reaction that mattered most was coming from space. Dr. Chen came a transmission from the communications array. We're receiving multiple signals from the liberated systems. They want to know what happens next. Sarah looked at the star charts spread across her desk, each one marking a world where beings had just tasted freedom for the first time in decades. 17 civilizations, each with their own cultures, their own dreams, their own desperate need for a future that didn't include slavery. Tell them, she said quietly, that they're not alone anymore. Tell them humanity stands with them. And tell them we're going to finish what we started. In orbit above Earth, the wreckage of the hegemony fleet served as a monument to what could be accomplished when the oppressed refused to accept their fate. But it also served as a warning to any who might threaten the fragile alliance that had just been born. The galaxy had a new power now. Not a collective consciousness that absorbed all individuality, but a coalition of free peoples who had chosen to stand together while remaining themselves. The humans had given the galaxy something it had almost forgotten. Hope. But hope, as humanity was about to learn, was a double-edged sword. It could inspire the greatest acts of heroism, but it could also make enemies more desperate and dangerous than ever before. In the far reaches of space, where the hegemony's core worlds lay hidden, ancient machines were awakening. Weapons that had slept for millennia were powering up. And at the center of it all, something that had once been human but was now something far worse, began to plan its revenge. The first hegemony war had ended in victory for the Alliance. But the real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy itself, was about to begin. Epilogue. The Price of Freedom. 6 months after the Battle of Earth. The Galactic Liberation Council met in what had once been the most secure conference room on Earth, the same UN building where Envoy Kethfer had delivered his ultimatum. Now, instead of human diplomats arguing over territorial disputes, representatives from 18 different species worked together to forge a new future. Elena Vasquez, now Admiral of the Combined Fleet, stood before a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked hegemony-controlled territory. Blue zones showed liberated worlds. Yellow zones indicated contested systems where fighting continued. The good news, she announced to the assembled delegates, is that we've liberated 47 star systems in the past 6 months. The Torval homeworld is free. The Zephyrian colonies have been restored to their people. 3 entire sectors of the galaxy are now under Alliance control. Applause rippled through the chamber, but Elena's expression remained grim. The bad news is that the hegemony has adapted. They've abandoned their centralized command structure in favor of smaller, more independent fleets. They've also begun developing new weapons specifically designed to counter our tactics. Dr. Sarah Chen, now Director of Xenological Research, stepped forward. We've identified the source of their new adaptability. Intelligence reports suggest the hegemony has awakened something they call the First Mind, an artificial intelligence that predates their collective by thousands of years. A murmur of unease ran through the chamber. Zakar, the liberated Zephyrian who served as the council's military advisor, spoke in his people's musical language before the translator rendered his words in standard. The first mind is legend among our people. It was said to be the creator of the original hegemony before even our world fell. If it has truly awakened, then we're facing an enemy that's had millennia to plan for this moment, Elena finished grimly. Secretary General Ose, who had become the de facto leader of the Galactic Liberation Council, stood slowly. In the past 6 months, she'd aged a decade, but her voice remained strong. Admiral Vasquez, what are our options? Elena looked around the room at faces that represented the hopes and fears of billions of beings across dozens of worlds. Humans sat beside Torval warriors, whose honor codes had been nearly destroyed by hegemony assimilation. Zephyrian artists, whose creativity had been suppressed for generations, worked alongside melodian engineers whose songs had been silenced by collective consciousness. We have 3 choices, Elena said. We can consolidate our gains, fortify the liberated worlds, and try to hold what we've won. We can continue our liberation campaigns, freeing worlds one system at a time. Or, she paused, looking directly at Secretary General Ose. Or we can take the fight to the hegemony core worlds and end this war once and for all. The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates argued for caution, for building up their strength before attempting such a dangerous mission. Others demanded immediate action, pointing out that every day of delay meant more worlds remained enslaved. But it was a quiet voice from the back of the room that silenced the argument. May I speak? Everyone turned to see a figure, most of them recognized but few had actually met. Kethavar, the former hegemony envoy, had spent the past 6 months in a rehabilitation facility, slowly learning how to be an individual after centuries as part of a collective consciousness. He was still pale, still unsettling to look at, but his silver eyes now held something they'd never contained before: doubt, pain, and the complex emotions that came with genuine free will. You honor us with your presence, Kethavar, Secretary General Ose said formally. What would you tell us? Kethavar stepped forward, his movement still too precise, too controlled. I have been part of the hegemony for 347 years. I have witnessed the conquest of dozens of worlds. I have seen species that fought bravely, and others that surrendered without resistance. But I have never seen anything like what humanity accomplished. He turned to Elena. Admiral, you asked about taking the fight to our core worlds. I must tell you, it has never been attempted. The core systems are protected by defenses that have stood for millennia, and at their heart lies something that even the collective feared. The first mind, Sarah said. Kethavar nodded. The first mind created the hegemony as an experiment in perfect order. When it grew tired of the experiment, it went to sleep, leaving us to spread its vision across the galaxy. But your rebellion has awakened it, and it is displeased. Admiral, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What are we talking about here? Another AI, a super weapon? Neither, Kethavar said quietly. The first mind is the digitized consciousness of the species that created the hegemony. An entire civilization uploaded into a quantum matrix, their individual thoughts merged into a single, terrible intelligence. It has the accumulated knowledge of millions of beings and the focused will of a god. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just fighting a galactic empire. They were fighting the ghost of an entire species that had transcended physical existence to become something beyond comprehension. So we're screwed, muttered Captain Santos, ever the pragmatist. 3 days later, Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the first ship of humanity's new fleet. Built from captured hegemony technology and powered by human determination, it was a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Around her, the largest fleet in Galactic, history prepared for the final battle. Human ships flew alongside Zephyrian star dancers, Torval battlecruisers, and vessels from a dozen other liberated species. Each ship carried warriors who had personal reasons to hate the hegemony, beings who had lost everything to the collective, and were willing to risk their lives to ensure it never happened again. "Admiral," reported Commander Park, now Elena's chief communications officer, "all fleets report ready for hyperspace jump." Elena looked out at the stars one last time, thinking about all the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. Captain Rodriguez, who had died ramming the ISS into a hegemony dreadnought. The Phoenix Squadron pilots who had given their lives to break the enemy fleet. The resistance fighters across 17 systems who had waited decades for this chance. "All ships," she announced over the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Vasquez. Today we go to end a war that has lasted for thousands of years. Today we fight not just for our own freedom, but for the freedom of every sentient being in the galaxy. Today we prove that no force in the universe is stronger than the will to be free." She paused, thinking of the words that had inspired humanity through its darkest hours. Remember Earth. Remember the resistance. Remember that we are the species that she looked around the room at the faces of beings who had risked everything for freedom. The question is, are we willing to pay the price? To finish this? To ensure that no other species ever has to face what we've faced?